Okay, good morning. So this is a Amud Yomi class that's going to be today on Vav Amud Aleph. But before we go to Vav Amud Aleph, I wanted to mention a couple of things that I had not had a chance to do in Ham and Beis, and one thing on Ham and Aleph as well. So just to go first on Ham and Beis, we had mentioned the last Gemara before the two dots. There's two dots is on the page. So the first one, Rabbi Shimon Levi Kol Hasam or Choisav Bailam Hazeh Zeicha V'Roya B'Shuas Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Anybody who is Sam, anyone who places his pathways in life is Zeicha to the Yeshua of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What exactly does it mean that somebody who sets his path in this world is Zeicha to see the Yeshua of Hashem? So we explain Rashi, that Rashi says, Ka'asam or Chaysav is Mechashiv Hefsid Mitzvah Keneged Schara, somebody who considers the loss of a mitzvah versus the schar of a mitzvah. But let's first back it up and explain the position of this Gemara as part of the wider Gemara that we've already discussed. If you look at the Gemara in Ham and Aleph, the whole Gemara was talking about Gatsi Ruach. This is the conclusion of that Gemara. So the question I would first open up with, do you think that that has anything to do with it? Do you think that the Gemara of Rabbi Shimon Levi of Kol Samar Chesed B'Elam Hazeh, as a siyum of this previous daf that's been talking about Gas Ruach, has anything to do with that? So the way Rashi is learning, I don't see the connection in an obvious way. However, according to the Rambam, if you look at the Rambam Hilchos the Rambam Hilchos Deis in Perek Aleph Halacha Daled, the Rambam writes Tzivu Chacham Rishonim Sheyehei Adam Som De'osav Tamid Umishar Osav Mechaven Osam Derech Be'emtzos. A person is supposed to be always trying to do the middle of the road. And the Kesef Mishnah there says that the source is from this Gemara over here, this Rabbi Shimon Levi. Kol Hasam Chosav B'Elam Hazeh Zeich B'Shuas Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a person is supposed to be trying to figure out what the Midah Mitzvos is, what the Beinoni approach is in something, and then trying to adhere to that. So again, according to the Rambam, what you would have to understand, Kol Hasam or Chosav Tamin or Chosav is De'osav. Right over here, then what this has to do with is the wider context of how we're talking about a person should be living. And we're saying that a person should be taking the Midah Mitzvos in life, and that would be the way the Rambam is literally, according to the Kesef Mishnah, translating Chosav to be De'osav, the Midas, the traits that a person has. Now, according to that, the Gemara then is sort of concluding with this general approach that we've already been talking about, one of the worst traits that a person has, namely gaiva. And when it comes to gaiva, it's a fight for a whole life. And Rabbi Shimon Levi is saying that when a person is dealing with the traits in general, you should be thoughtful about the traits and should generally be trying to take the middle of the road. I should just point out that according to the Rambam, it's very interesting because the Rambam himself says that if you take the middle of the road on nearly every trait, that's the right approach. But there's two exceptions to that. What are the two exceptions? One is gaiva, gasirach, and the other one is kas. But we're not talking about kas for now. So just when it comes to the gasirach, just when it comes to arrogance, the Rambam says that if you take the middle of the approach on this one, you're going to be an anav. And that's not the ideal. The ideal is to be an anav ma'id. Like Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't just an anav, he was an anav ma'id. That's to go to the end. When it comes to arrogance, to totally avoid any arrogance at all. And the way you avoid arrogance at all is by going to the other end totally. Not just a little arrogant, totally to the other end. So according to this approach, so then what the Rambam says in Hilchos Deis is that if you go to the end, which is what you're supposed to, not just supposed to be a little bit arrogant, then you'll be called a chassid, not just a chacham, which is if you're in the middle. And it's interesting because the Rambam himself does not quote the full position of Rava. Rava says, Amar Rava, we learned in Ham and Aleph, V'shamta the isbe, V'shamta the lesbe. If you have too much arrogance, you go to Nidoi. And if you don't have arrogance, you go to Nidoi. Either way, you go to Nidoi. But the Ram only quoted Bisham to the Isbeit, that if you have arrogance, you're going to Nidoy. Not if you don't have arrogance, you're also going to go to Nidoy. Again, as we mentioned in the last class, there is a machlekes clearly in the Gemara, or maybe it was two classes ago, that there is a machlekes in the Gemara if what Rav Chibar Rashi said that Tam Chacham Tzarech Shehei By Echa Mishmeinu B'Shminis, 1/64 of arrogance, if that is in fact accepted or not, that seems to have been a debate in the Gemara. According to the Rambam, if this person has some element of arrogance, then he's a chacham, he's an anav. But that's not the idea. The idea is to be totally mufka from arrogance. And in that case, you know it's a chas, and you go to the total, to the end. But again, according to the Rambam's way of learning, this Rabbi Shimon Levi calls Samachayis is coming then to explain or siyum to this conversation about arrogance, about bad traits. We're saying that a person should generally be taking the middle of the road. Again, with the exception when it comes to Gas Saruach, as we mentioned already, Hayam Aleph. However, according to Rashi's learning, Shimon Levi is talking about something entirely different. Shimon Levi is talking about Kala Samar is not a connection to the previous Gemara. It's a new point. You may want to ask, well, what's that Gemara doing here? But let's put that on the side. Whatever the reason is, the Gemara is being silent with Shimon Levi's idea that a person is supposed to be thinking about the hefset of losing a mitzvah versus the schar of getting it on the mitzvah. And then the question becomes on Rashi, aside from the fact that it doesn't really flow in terms of the Gemara, but why is this a lesson of Rabbi Shimon Levi? Don't we have a Mishnah in Avis? The Mishnah in Avis says that Rabbi Omer, what is the right way a person is supposed to be going? A person is supposed to be mechash, have some mitzvah, connected schara. So we know that that's a fundamental lesson in Rabbi's Mishnah. So why are we quoting this from Rabbi Shimon Levi over here? In fact, Gemara Babash and Ayin Ches tells us on the pasuk, "Ken Yomer HaMoshe Bo Cheshbon Tibanav Sikon Ner Sichain," that we're talking about those who are Moshe on the Yetzer Hara and they make cheshbonis and have said mitzvah connected schara, and we don't talk anything about Rabbi Shimon Levi. So again, perhaps we can answer that according to Rashi, the Gemara tells us in Eruvin Yud Gimel and Beis, after discussing the Machlekes B'Shamai Hill, we started to go like Beis Hill over Beis Shammai. Shem Da'luven Hayu. So the Gemara says, a question: is it better for a person to have been born or not be born? The Gemara answers, look, it's better for a person not to have been born. Once you're born, a person should be B'Masher Shemaisav. And what does it mean B'Masher Shemaisav? So Rashi says that a B'Masher Shemaisav is a person should be Mechashiv, have some mitzvah connected schar. So, according to this, then maybe you can answer like this. It's not even Rebbe's idea. Of Mechashiv, the hefset of a mitzvah connected to schar of mitzvah. We're already saying the Gemara about a time of Hasham and Hillel when they were debating whether or not it's better for a person to be born. Rebbe adopted in the Mishnah of Avis. And in the same way that Rebbe adopted the Mishnah of Avis, so too, Rabbi Shimon Levi adopted it as his aphorism as well. So then, come out that we could say it in Shimon Levi, we could say it in Rabbi, but it's a much older sort of a memory. Chasha has the mitzvah connected schar. All right, that was one point I wanted to mention. The second point I wanted to mention was back on the Gemara, on Hayam and Aleph. The Gemara mentioned a line about the Azhara for Gasa Ruach. The Gemara said a line on top of Hayam and Aleph. The Gemara said, Kol Makom. It's in the narrow lines. So the Gemara says about 7 or 8 lines from the top of the page in Hayam Alf, Kol Makom Shenemar Hishamer Pen Ve'al Einoi Ela B'Loi Sasa. That wherever it says these kinds of lashon of Hishamer Pen Al or Loi, we're going to see in the Rambam that is essentially a Loi Sasa. So the Gemara says that there's an Azhara for not having an ego. So the Gemara's lashon 3 lines up from Hayam and Alf was Azhara leGasirach Minayin Hayim. It says Azhara for Gasirach. The Gemara says either a pasuk in Yirmiyah or a pasuk in Parsei K'Visham L'cha Pentishkech L'Shem L'Kecha. Because wherever it says Hishamer, it means a Leisasa. So I looked in the Ram Sefer Mitzvahs and I don't see it there. The Ram doesn't count it. The Chinuch doesn't count it. The Minei Mitzvahs generally don't count it. There is an exception, which is the Smag. The Smag in Mitzvah Samach Dal and the Lavan, he counts the lav of not being a Baal Gaiva. But maybe we'll say more about it in a minute, but the Ram doesn't count it. And I'll make the question stronger. It's not that the Ram doesn't hold of this Gemara of Hisham Pen Va'al as a so he does. He brings down the Sefer Mitzvahs a number of times. The Rambam, first of all, in Shirish Ches, the Rambam brings it down. The Rambam brings it down and says, wherever it says Hisham Pen Al, and he adds in Loy, it means Loy Sasa. And then you see clearly, if you look in the Sefer Mitzvahs in the Lavan Mitzvah Kuf Tzadi Gimel, the Rambam says that there's an Azhar to eat Kalai HaKaren, and we learned this from the fact that it says pen tikdash hamaleh. It uses the word pen. The Rambam uses a lashon kfar kodem, that it has already existed before. And where do you see it existed before in the Sefer Mitzvahs? I'm thinking that the source is another mitzvah in the Lavan. Looking at the Rambam Sefer Mitzvahs in Lavan, Samach Zayin. The Rambam over there says that there's a lav to be misatzel when it comes to being guarding the Beis Hamikdash, and over there the Rambam doesn't explain that it's coming from Yisham Pen or Al. However, if you look in the Chinuch there in Shin Sadi Aleph, the Chinuch says that we have a mitzvah that we're not supposed to mevatel Shmiras Hamikdash. How do we know? Because of the fact that it says Yisham Pen Va'al. The pasuk says over there, lashon of Shmira. So we see that the Ram uses it already a few times in the Sefer Mitzvahs, and in the Shirish Ches, he says that it's an Azhar. So it's clear the Ram must hold that that Hisham Pen or Al or Lai is a lav. And over here he doesn't. Over here he clearly doesn't. And I'll tell you that this Hisham Pen or Al is not just this Gemara here. It actually goes back further. It's clearly from Midrashim, Sifreis, etc., where this is clear as well. So this is the fundamental question that I wanted to mention on the Rambam. How come it doesn't count in the Sefer Mitzvahs and the Lavan, the Isra being Gasi Urach? So I think you can give a few answers. One answer I think would be Pashit is that it's one of these mitzvahs that underlies Kol Torah Kula. The Rambam is Sherish Dal, and the Sefer Mitzvah says he's not going to count mitzvahs that underlie Kol Torah Kula. Number two, it could be that by the Gemara bringing up a pasuk from Navi first, maybe it's just an asmachta, right? Because the order should have been different, or I'll say stronger. Normally we say different Kabbalah Alfinam, you're not going to learn a lav from a pasuk in Navi. So that told the Rambam that this is just really an asmachta in this usage, even though as a fundamental halachic usage he does accept it. That was one point. Second point I want to mention, as I said, that the Samag does say that there's an Isser here of being a Baal Gaiva. It's a lav. So the Samag counts it in the Lavan and Samach Dalet. It's interesting, you have to look at the Samag inside. You look at the Samag, you'll see that he says that the reason he's counting it is because of the fact that he had a dream. Because he says, I know the Ram doesn't count it. I shouldn't count it. So he says, I gave a drasha about not being about Gaiva and Shul. And it's about I wasn't going to count it in the Sefer Mitzvahs. And then I went to sleep and I had a dream. And in my dream, I was told that how can I leave over this mitzvah? So I put it in. This opens up a major topic. We already alluded to a little bit before about the Gemara and Dalam and Beis about Sotah Shem Libeya when it came to Ben Azai, knowing the amount of time to do Hara. When he wasn't married, was he married and divorced? Was he just had Kedusha, Nafshachash Matar, the Gemara and Yivamis, etc. So maybe here is another example of it, of dreams being utilized to effectuate halacha. We have the Shaus Shuvas Nashamayim. We have the Shibur Haleket, famously, or I should say, a number of places he does quote the Shaus Shuvas Nashamayim, but in one place he says that these things are not Ma'ala and Mayrid, why just like Hashemayim. Test. We have a number of examples where dreams were used to create halacha, and so there's a larger question of when dreams are used or not used to in fact, effectuate halacha. We have a fundamental or a major tshuva here in relation to this topic that is kedai to look into a little bit more. We don't have time really to go over it now, but it's a big tshuva of the tashbeit in Chelik Beis Sim Kuf Chav Ches, where he goes through a lot of the different sides of this topic, different rayas here and there. I have other rayas that we use dreams, so we don't use dreams that he doesn't bring. For example, we had a Bracha Sutches. We have woman that belonged to Shmuel. His father came to him in a dream, told him that this money belongs to you, this money belongs to your son, this is this. So, right, this is very Yerusha. But no, he gave the money out to Simon because his father came to him in a dream. So you see, it has implications. Um, right, we had the Gemara in Tainus, right? We had the Gemara Tainus Chaf Dalet, where I think this the Tashbetz does bring down, right, that when Rav saw that. He asked everybody if anybody had dreams, and somebody had a dream. He says, "Oh, it's a good chalaim." I think we're in Chaf Dalet. She said, "Okay, we're gonna now we know it's a good Siman to daven, so we should daven." And then rain came. We had, but we have to deal with the fact that Loi B'Shamayim He or the Gemara in Gittinun Beis that the Rechalim Misalim Avlim Readin. We have to deal with sort of the back and forth on this, but we don't have time right now. All right, so now I want to go to the Gemara in Aleph. Start again from the Gemara in Ham Beis that we quickly went through on the last time I did this. I don't remember when that was anymore. We'll just run through it quickly. So the Gemara gives here 4 different understandings of connecting why when a woman who is suspected of adultery, right, she had kinu, she had stira, and she hasn't drunk, but her husband passed away, that we say that she doesn't fall to the brother and even when only chalitza. Why is that? So the Gemara says like this: let her get evil. Rabbi says we have exeris hakasa. Pasuk tells us when a woman is suspected of doing things in an inappropriate manner. So according to Rabbi Yosef, the state in pasuk, she leaves his home, her husband, and she goes to another man's home. She can go to another man's home, but not to the Yavam. In other words, the Yavam is not a part of Acher. Now, this is a larger conversation of whether or not Yavam is ever considered part of Acher, but it's not for now. For our purposes now, Rabbi Yosef is saying that we have Xeris HaKosov, that when a woman is found to have an Eretz Davar, she is sent out of her first husband's home, and she goes to someone else's home, but not to the Yavam. So Abaye now tries to challenge his Rabbi Yosef. Why are you saying that she has to get chalitza at all? Let's say that she just should be able to walk away. If she can only marry an ishacher, somebody who's not related to her husband, so let's say that she doesn't need chalitza at all. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef says to Abaye, what are you talking about? So over here, Rabbi Yosef is a very stark response to Abaye and says, what are you talking about? If the husband was around, would she not need to have a get from him before she walks out? Of course, the pasuk over there is all in parsha of a get. He must be etc. But the pasuk says, that pasuk says that the kosav was sefer krisos for nasam biyada. He has to write her sefer krisos, and then she goes you see the husband has to write a get. So the same way if the husband was here, he was alive, he would have to write a get. So too, if the husband's not here, she has to get chalitza. There is still a zika, there is still a connection, there's still a marriage. We're saying she shouldn't marry anybody from this guy anymore. She should be leaving him. She should be going to somebody else's house. So we're saying that there's no connection more to the house of Reuven, who died. And that includes Reuven's brother. But to say that she doesn't need chalitza, she would need to get it for Reuven was here. So for sure she needs chalitza as well. So that is the first way to explain this idea that the Mishnah says that if the woman's husband passed away before she had a chance to drink, that she only gets chalitza, not tibum. But that is a second way of saying over Rabbi Yosef. The second way of understanding it is that Rabbi Yosef says that it says in pasuk that the pasuk says that she leaves his house and goes to the house of another man, the lawyer lists for the base, so she shouldn't destroy the house that she's in. And you want to say that she should be able to have yibum? Of course not. Can't be yibum. In other words, a woman who's doing a stira, she's doing the opposite of what it means to build a house, right? We talk about chalitza, we talk about dasha leaving as base achiv, we talk about being baina biases, based on Yisrael. The whole idea of building a house, building a marriage. Stira is being soiser, it's being it apart. So Rabbi Yosef is saying, what does the Mishnah mean when the Mishnah says that she's chilet v'chilet? Because the pasuk says, she should go marry somebody else, she should get out of here. Why should she get out of here? Because she shouldn't destroy this house of Reuven. So now you're going to say Reuven's dead. So now she should go along and marry Reuven's brother Shimon. She's going to marry Reuven's brother Shimon. She's going to destroy the house. We want her away. We want her to not be destroying houses. So when she's not destroying houses, we don't want her to be getting with Reuven's brother and destroying his house. So on that, the Abaya then says, really? So the issue with her is that she's a destroyer of houses. And that's why you have to get rid of her. And that's why she can't marry his brother, because she's going to destroy the house. Says Abaya, so Abaya says, well, if that's the case, then she shouldn't be marrying someone else. B'chlal, she shouldn't be marrying anyone. Why do you mean that she's not able to marry? She's not able to stay married to Reuven anymore. She can't marry Reuven's brother. But why are you letting her go marry Yaakov? Why are you letting her go marry some random person? The Pasuk says, she's going to marry someone else. Why would you let her be marrying anyone else? Isn't she a destroyer of houses? So again, say, like this, don't let her marry anybody else, so she shouldn't destroy that home. So in other words, Rabbi Yosef, your argument about why Yibum doesn't apply is because she's a house destroyer, and so we shouldn't let her destroy the dead guy's brother's house either. Well, why are we letting her destroy anyone's house? On that, Rabbi Yosef responds, and we turn the page to development alpha. So Rabbi Yosef now responds back to are we forcing her to be married to somebody else? We're not forcing her into someone else's home. She has the ability to go marry someone else. We're not forcing someone else to actually marry her, but she has the ability to do so. So in other words, don't bring me a ride from the fact that it doesn't that this has anything to do with the fact that that we're actually taking her and pushing her into somebody else's arms and saying, okay, you have to marry her. And how can you do that? Because it's a house that's her. No. We're saying she may be able to go to someone else's house and be married. Somebody else is able to marry if they would like. But within this home, she's a home destroyer. She's a home wrecker. We don't want her to be Seiser, the Yavam's house either. And so therefore, Yibum doesn't apply B'chlal. The only option will be Chalitza. Again, we don't have time really to go through, but if you look at the bottom, the bottom two Taisus, so Taisus in Eloi, Silabal, Miloi, Bay, Gats, Taisus there talks about Mordechai. Again, we have one of those rabbis, Hiksha Rabbi. We had on top of page Tamil Rabbi, a few places, as you mentioned. So he talks about the fact that there are what are the other situations where there would be just an option of Chalitza, not Yibum. Right? But there'd be some situations where there's no Yibum, no Chalitza, but what they were saying, but there is one, but not the other. Right? And also on the bottom Taisus, Kotzeb ben Chananel, which he also done the page before, that the whole word of a building a Bais Nam Yisrael is the Yivna, right? That's what Mechalitza, the woman says, when she spits, she says, right? He's not building a house, right? This woman's a homemaker. She's being says her a house. Yeah. All right, so now we turn to page 2 to Vav and Aleph. And now we have a third approach of Rabbi Yosef. And this third approach, it seems that Rabbi Yosef doesn't respond. The question is there a response or not? But here, it seems that Abaya's riposte is stronger than Rabbi Yosef's understanding. So here we have again a third version of Rabbi Yosef could have said to explain why there's only chalitza here when the woman who has had kidney and steer done to her, but has not drunk, and her husband passed away, why we only give the option of chalitza and not an option of yibum? Again, this is not a practical halacha l'maisa conversation, right? But in practical halacha, there is machlokes today between Ashkenazim and Sfardim whether or not yibum could still apply at all. Right? In times of the Gemara, there's an issue about suspecting people doing it for the wrong reasons, meaning that maybe they wanted to get together in sort of an appropriate kind of a fashion. So the Ashkenazim stopped even already a long time ago. Rambam brings that down. That's the halacha. But by the Sfardim, it's not the case. There is still possibilities of evil. We're saying over here is that even if everybody would not be suspecting this Yavam and this woman of anything, even according to Sfardim, there's no possible permutation of where the even would be allowed. Why? Because the fact that this woman either was or the Torah is trying to protect against homewreckers in this home. Well, now we're going to see a third reason. What is the third reason? The Torah calls the second husband, who she goes and marries, an acher. Acher here is being used in a very negative connotation, right? Not sure if this connects to the more Chagiga there about Elisha ben Abu being known as Acher, whether that was really Acher or Acher, like Meshach Acher, the more getting involved, I'm not 100% clear. But Acher is the other. It's this person who doesn't have a name. It's somebody who we are denigrating. And what we're saying over here is Rabbi Yosef is suggesting Hakos of Kari Acher, Yatsum Beis of Halchavais Alish Acher is like plenty of money. It's we're not giving you a name. We're not saying this guy who marries her, this person was Motzah B'Ervas Davar, and the husband gave her a divorce. We're not saying that this second person who marries her is a good guy. We're calling him an Acher. He's really not on the level. He's not such a good decision that he made. Because of Kari Acher, the pasuk called him an Acher Shein Zeh Ben Zug Shel Rishon, because he's not on the level. He's not a Ben Zug of the first husband. The first husband, he noticed it ever stuff. He got rid of her. He's not wasting his time with such a person. And this guy is marrying her. Shezeh, the first husband, the first guy, he got rid of the Risha, the Marshas, right? This horrible woman. He's got rid of her. But the second guy, he's bringing her into the house. Torah's calling him an Acher. The Torah's not saying he's a good guy. The Torah's saying he's a bad guy for making a bad decision like this. And you're going to say that the dead husband's brother, maybe he should have done Yibum. He's going to be like an Acher. He's going to be like a horrible person. No. This third reason is, again, it's not really a drasha from the pasuk, but it's a little bit based upon the pasuk. The Torah calls the second husband an Acher. And that means he's not on the level. He's not a ben zug of the first husband. He's doing a bad thing. He's bringing Marshas into the house. So, therefore, since that's the case, the Torah is denigrating the second husband. Says Rabbi Yosef, you want to say that the first husband's brother should have to be doing evil? No, of course not. And he's also not want to be like an Acher. So therefore, it's not even an option to consider doing evil. This is the third approach of Rabbi Yosef to explain why evil was not on the salad menu, was not an option. That was given only chalitza. On that, the Gemara says, so Abai says, really? So this Acher is a bad dude, right? He bringing the Risha into the house, the second husband. What happens if she married him? So she marries this Acher guy. Let's say he died without children. You're going to say that his brother is not going to do even on this Risha, that cost of Kari Acher, Gabe the high, because the Torah called him Acher, Gabe the first husband? No, of course not. Mia b'shem tev have a kaima. Of course, she's going to have yibum. Why? Because whatever reasons were that the first marriage didn't work out, whatever reasons were that there was an Aristov, whatever it was, didn't apply to the second marriage. And so when the second husband dies, of course, she's going to do yibum. So in other words, You want to make this argument that the Torah calls the second guy Nacher, and so therefore, how could it even be a possibility of Yibum? No, it could very well be that the issue was as it related to the marriage of the first guy, and then the marriage of the second guy worked out fine. So if it could work out fine in the way marriage of the second guy, the same way that the second guy, if he passed away without children, it would be Yibum. So maybe if the first husband is no longer, but maybe with the brother of the first husband, it could have worked out too. You have no proof of the fact that Torah called him an Achem. Again, Abaya's lashon is Amalei Abaya El Me'atanisis LaAchem El Meisplei Ban Litzabim Because the Torah Achem Gabi Dahai. No, you have a shame to have a kaimer. So in other words, don't read too much into the Achem. Achem just means another, right? It just means somebody else. And many times you find the word Achem, there's no negative connotation. So as a result, Abaya here is slugging up Rabbi Yosef on this one without a good response from Rabbi Yosef. Whether that means Rabbi Yosef didn't have a response or the Gemara didn't like the response, I'm not 100% clear. But what is clear is that there were so far 3 different interpretations of Rabbi Yosef to explain why it was that Chalitza was the only option given to a woman who has had kinyan steer done to her, but not yet drunk, and then her husband died. Now we have a 4th reason. Rava Omar Kal V'chomer. Rava says no, it's a Kal V'chomer. In other words, until now we've had Xeris HaKasos, different types of drushes out of a pasuk of Yatzon Beis of Hochavay Tzolei. But according to Rava, it's a Kal V'chomer. Remember, we have said, and we'll be saying again, that a Kal V'chomer can happen on the level of a Daraisa. Right? It's one of the 13 hermeneutical principles. So Rava is saying it's a Kal V'chomer. What's the Kal V'chomer like this? He says the Gemara, Rav Amar Kal V'chomer, Im Nesher B'muter Lo, if she became Asar to the first husband, who she was mutter to, why she become Asar? Because of the fact that she's now been guilty, or I shouldn't say been guilty, but been found by 2 Eidim to have been done Kinoi and Stira. So she's now Asar to husband until she drinks. So Im Nesher B'muter Lo, if she's Asar to somebody who she was once mutter to, Asar Lo like Kol Shkein. Over here by the brother, right? The brother, she's also to the brother, right? Why? Because she's the Eshes Ach, right? She's the brother's wife. So she's always been also to the Yavam, Mitzad Eshes Ach. So if she's now also to the husband, you think now she's going to become who she was originally mutter to. You think now somebody who she was always also to, she's going to become mutter to. It's Kal V'chomer. If by Ruvain, she's who she was always mutter to, she's now also because it was Kinoi and Stira. So Ruvain's brother, she was always also to Mitzad Eshes Ach. Now she's going to become mutter to him? Impossible. Says the Gemara, Amalei Abaya. So Abaya now wants to respond to Rav and Shlagim. Abaya is playing the spoiler in this Gemara, and so now he comes to try to Shlagim Rav and tell this. Amalei Abaya, El Me'at V'Kohen Gadol Shekidish Asa Almano Meis. When Abaya says, well, why does he have a Kohen Gadol who was Mekadesh in Almana, and then he died down? You know, a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry an Almana. But a Kohen Hedid can marry an Almana, not like a Grusha, but a Kohen Gadol can only marry a woman who has not been married before, right? He can only marry he cannot marry a Almana. So says the Gemara, so according to your logic, a Kohen Gadol would marry a Almana who he was not supposed to. Nevertheless, exclusion is types in here. It's not an issue about that. So now the Kohen Gadol died. And he died without children. So maybe we should say that maybe there shouldn't be at all. Why not? Because if she is going to be asa to the one that she was mutter to, meaning the original husband, Kohen Gadol, she was mutter to, she's now asa to him. So ba'asala on the brother who should be asa to mitzvah meis ach like Kol Shkein. So shouldn't she should remain asa to him now? So there shouldn't be an option of you only doing chalitza. Someone says, stop, right? You're breaking my brains. What do you mean? What are you saying, Abaya? You don't make any sense. You're saying that a Kohen goes Mikash and Almana, so then he dies, so he was mutter to her, and now became Asa. What are you talking about? Nesra? Ha, Asira V'Kaima. What do you mean? She became Asa to him. who she was mutter to. She was always asur to him. A kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana. Period. Full stop. So there was never a chance heter say, oh, initially she was mutter to this guy, and then she became asur to him. So the brother who she was always asur to him, so she should remain asur to him now, and there shouldn't be any even showing bichalitza. Much is just entirely inapposite. Right. What do you mean that there's becoming us? It was always us. What do you mean mutter? It was never mutter. She was always us to this current God. So Rabbi tries again to give you another example. Ella Ashes Kain Shenetzo Mace. Right. What I just said obviously doesn't work with cloud. So by giving you another case, what's another case? Ashes Kain Shenetzo Mace. You have a wife of a Kain who was forcibly taken against her will. So when it comes to Ashes Kain, it's very different by Israel. By Israel, it's okay, it's no issues. Move on in life. Sometimes it happens. Many issues over the years during pogroms and the like. These things took place. But it has no impact in terms of the marriage. They can stay married. However, by Kain, even if the woman was nanas, totally against her will, no question about it, she's still also to the Kain, her husband. Right? So Ella Ashes Kain, and then so mates, we have an Ashes Kain who was never honest. So in that situation, where she was nanas, and then the husband dies. So remember, she's regular married to a kohen. So now she was nanas. So now she becomes us to her husband. Now the husband dies. They had no kids. Does she fall to the brother? It says I like this. Aleshes kohen shenenza umeis v'yesh le'ach cholol. This is kohen who died. And I'm sorry, Neshes Kain, who was nanas, her husband now died. So to her husband, she was originally mutter to, and now she become asa to because she was nanas. And he has a brother who's a chol, so there wouldn't be any issue of marrying the chol who's a nanas. There was no issue with that kind of a kain because a chol doesn't have any of these kinds of rules. He's whatever. He's a child of a marriage that was not appropriate for a client to do, and so as a result, he doesn't have any of the laws of the kahanim that the kahanim have to adhere to. He's able to marry somebody who's a divorcee, no issues at all. Or in this case, he's able to marry a woman who is nanas, no issues at all. So says the well, Ashes Kain, but he still has the issue of Ashes Ach. So it says about like this. Maybe we should talk about the following situation. Ashes Kain and so Mace. You have a woman who was married to a Kain. She was nanas. Then her husband died without children. And he had a brother who's a chol, who's a yavam. Now, what is yam? That she shouldn't do yimid or why? Because here she was initially mutter, now she became asur, and now we're saying that she should marry the yavam, right? The mutala. So it says again the Gemara Alashis Kenshin and some Mesvish Achal like this yam in Neser mutala. The asur like Koshkein. Right by here, she was originally mutter to the right. Then she became asur because she was nanas. So now you're going to say that on the brother who she was always asur to Mitzvah Shlach, now she's going to become mutter to him. She's already asur on the husband. Says the Gemara. So this sounds like a much better response of Abaye to Rava. In other words, Rava wanted to say that when you have a situation where you were initially mutter, then you have a shas heter, and then you become asur. So then when you fall in yibum to somebody you're always asur to, so then you shouldn't become mutter. There shouldn't be a shas heter. And so therefore, that's why yibum is not an option. Only chalitza is given as an option. So Abaye is trying to plug that up and saying, okay, that's if you say that over here, what are you going to say over here? What are you going to say in a situation of a kohen who's married to a woman who's nanas and he has a brother who's a chal? Over here also was mutter, then he became asur because she was nanas. So the yavam who's always asur because Ach is not going to become mutter. So the Gemara says, "Minus be Yisrael mishra shari v'gabi dahai leka isura." So the Gemara has a relatively lumdish answer over here. Says the Gemara, when it comes to an Einis by Yisrael, there's no issue at all. it's entirely mutter. And when it comes to this person, leka yisura. When it comes to this person, there's no isser at all. The etzle, says Rashi, who heter gomer ve'en ze kavachomer. And there's a total heter, and it's not a kavachomer. What is Rashi trying to say? Rashi explains that when it comes to a situation of an issue, when it comes to a situation where she was mizana, so both the Baal and the Yavam would be equal in regards to this Isser in Haisa Tachtov, right? If she was married, then have a Kavachomer, Sher Machmas Nesun Harishem in Iskegas Libum, Vimal Habal Niskalkula Kavachomer Yavam. In other words, when it comes to an issue of the Znus that the woman did, so that is something that would be equal to the Baal and the Yavam, and that would impact on the marriage in a fundamental way that we would be able to say this kavachomer. But in a situation where there's no issue at all, right? By this chalal, he's like a Yisrael l'chol davar, and a woman is nanas. There's no issue here at all. So you want to say that yes, but she was aser mitzad the eshes ach shabai. So therefore, since there was never a shas heter, so therefore now she should be aser in terms of this fact that she was nanas. There's no kavachomer. In other words, what the Gemara is differentiating is between a situation. In other words, we're challenging Abai. We're saying Abai, no, your upslugging is not correct. The situation of a Kohen who had a wife that was nanas and has a brother who's a chol is in opposite to our situation. What do we mean? By a situation in which she was zinsa beratzon, or a situation where there was kinui and stira, and we suspect that she was zinsa beratzon. So over there is a pagam in the marriage. There's something fundamental. She becomes usher to the husband. So she was originally mutter, now she's usher. So we're saying that Yavam, who's a whole koyach, to be having a zika to her, is based upon the marriage of the first guy, of his brother. So that marriage is fundamentally tortured. That marriage is already fundamentally challenged. So mitzvah the fact that marriage is fundamentally challenged, mitzvah the fact that she was in Beratzin, so that means that, or it's on the suspicion that she was in Beratzin, so now that I have Adam on the kinu and the stira and made her usher, so the fact that the husband died doesn't change the fact that this marriage was fundamentally tortured. This marriage was fundamentally challenged. There was already a major problem until she drank. There was a fundamental problem. So therefore, I can say that with regards to the first guy, if she is going to be initially mutter, then became asa because of what we suspect that she has done. So on the Yavam, whose whole kayach to be marrying her is mitzad, the strength of that marriage, of the first marriage. So the fact that marriage is now on the rocks, without her drinking, it's fundamentally challenged, is not going to be a shas heter. And therefore, we're only going to give the option of chalitza, not ibum. But in a situation where they have the Ashes Kohen who was nanas, the marriage is not b'chlal fundamentally tortured at all. There's a technical rule about a kohanim that they cannot be in a marriage in a situation like this. But if it would be by Yisrael, there would be no issues at all. So the fact that she was initially mutter, then became aser, that isser is not because of the fundamental flaw in the marriage. The marriage is fine. There's a technical rule that the Kahanim have to adhere to by Israel and would have no issue with it. So again, that's what the Gemara means. The Gemara says that it's not an issue of Issa here at all. This woman has done nothing wrong. There is no issue that is fundamentally challenging this marriage b'chlal. In fact, the marriage is totally fine if it was Yisrael. So the fact that she's technically now usher to the Kohen when she was originally mutter is, and then the guy dies, but he has a Yavam who's a brother to step in, mitzad the zika, the keach of the first marriage. It's not challenged. But the fact that she's usher to him is not usher because of the marriage Shabbat. It's usher because of a technical issue about Kahanim, a technical rule about the Kahanim. And so therefore the Kal Chamer doesn't apply. So in other words, Rava is correct. And the way this way of learning Abaya is being pushed back, Rava is able to say that we can learn out that the only option would be Chalitza and not Yibum because of the fact that we can learn out of Kal Chamer. Because in this situation, with respect to being Mizana B'Ratzin, which would be a fundamental challenge to the marriage, and that Shas Heter becoming now Aser is tantamount or a testament to a problem with the marriage. So therefore, a Yom is coming B'Kach, the Zika, based upon the first marriage, there's nothing to be based on. So therefore, there will only be a Chalitza option. Whereas by the situation of Cain, it was Nenas, and has a brother who's a Cholol. I'm sorry, you have a Kohenes who was married to a Kohen. You have a woman who was Nenas, who was married to a Kohen. The fact that she has a Shas Heter now became Aser, it's not a challenge in the marriage. It's a challenge in the technical rules based upon Kahanim. But if the Kohen died and now she falls to the brother, she could still have Yibum, because if this brother was a Chol who doesn't have these laws of Kahanim applied to him, there was nothing wrong with that marriage. Yes, it was technically a time of Isser because he's Esach, but it's not going to be that we say, oh, Mesika is based upon the first marriage, and over here she's awesome. Yes, she's awesome, but she's not awesome mitzad a problem in the marriage. She's awesome mitzad Hilchos Kahanim. And so therefore, she would be in fact allowed to do Yibum. Yeah. All right, so now we're up to the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us, these are aser to eat the truma. Which are these? If a woman says, I'm tummy to you, and if Adam come along and say that she is tame, that they know that she is Mizana, that she be also the truma. Or if she says, I'm not drinking, right? So again, all these situations we're talking about after Kinu and Stira, right? So she said, I'm Tameh, after Kinu and Stira did to her, or Adam, we're going to see that in a minute in the Gemara. Or if she says, I'm not drinking, or her husband refused to make her drink, or the husband had a relation with her on the road, right? So a husband doesn't want his wife to drink after she had Kinu and Stira, she doesn't need truma. A husband who's Baal Allah Badarach, also we say that she is going to be Aser. Even if she would drink, it wouldn't work anymore. As we'll see, Miniko Ish Me'avin, that's only when the husband is Minuka Me'avin, if he was guilty of having relations with her after Redikin and Stira happened. So then the Mesoita are not going to work. But she would still be Aser eating Truma. I should just point out Taisus here and Taisus Shatz both point out the Gemara in the end of the Dharm Tzadi. The Gemara over there talks to the Mishnah Shen and Mishnah Achroina about initially we used to trust them when they would say that they were Tameh. But after we began to suspect that Shemin and Nebunesh Acher, and so we no longer trusted them. So if we're no longer trusting them, when we say Shemin and Nebunesh Acher, so the question becomes, why over here are we trusting them? And trusting the woman, she says to me, Ani lach that she's also eat truma. So Tais points out, Tais sounds both say, well, obviously it's different. It's different over here because here we're talking about a situation after Canaan and Stira. There's already Reglaim Ladavas, therefore we trust her. And if we don't suspect Shemin and Nebeshach as we do in the Mishnah in Nidar. Okay, so I have a Gemara. We have to hold up a little bit of this Gemara. The Gemara says as follows: Amr of Amram, Milso Amram of Sheshes, of Amram quarter of Sheshes, to say Vanar Lon Agnim and Mesnis, and he opened up her eyes in the Mishnah. What do Rav Sheshes say? Rav Sheshes said, Sotah Shesh La'edim Medina Sayam in a man but so Rav Sheshes has a fundamental position that when there are Edim Medina Sayam, the water is not going to break the woman. You have to bear that in mind throughout this figure. If there was Edim in Medina Sayam, that the woman was Nisana, then the water's not going to check her out. My timer says to him, what's the reason? Because the Pasuk says that she was um, uh, closeted, she was cloistered with this person who she suspected, the husband suspected of, and had done kinoi with her. But there was no Adam. What do you mean there was no Adam? The leka the Yedaba, because there was nobody that knew about it. Fugi from a situation where there'll be somebody who knows about it. In other words, Rav Sheshes is learning out from the pasuk. She was cloistered. She became Tomei, and no one knew about it. That if someone knows about it, then Mesaita doesn't work. The whole punishment of Mesaita is only dependent on the fact that nobody knows about it. If somebody knows about it, it doesn't work. Now, the first thing to note is what are we talking about? We already said Minister of Hinitma of back, way back. They weren't told us on Beis Amud Aleph that we learn out from the aid aim law. We said, oh, what does aid mean? We end up saying, well, it means two aidim. The aid aim law means there weren't two aidim, but there was only one aid, and one that we trust. So now what are you saying? The aid aim law means that there are no aidim at all, that there are no two aidim, and because if there are aidim, then it's not going to work at all. Then we already used that to say that there was one aid. Now you're saying that means that there was no aidim at all. Isn't that a bit of a different drasha? So the Gemara says, or Rashi says, Tashan says, look, there could be different ways to learn it out. Before then, we wanted to use it, like we said on Daf Beis, Daf Gimel, that Ve'ed Ein Ba, to tell us there wasn't two aid, it was really one aid, and aid echad is not menace to prevent a woman from drinking. Right? Normally, after you have two aidim on kinyan and stira, so she would drink. But we're saying if it's aid echad, then she was nitmei, so we're going to trust the aid echad, and she will not be given to drink. That was the drasha there. Now we have a different drasha. This drasha is telling us aid ein ba means that there were no aidim, because if there are aidim, then the water will not drink. The water will not drink. Sorry, the water will not work. The mesaita will not work to cause her to be rechech mefelas vespetnech tzava. She won't fall apart. This is another drasha from Ve'ed Ein Ba. Rashi says, or Toshan said, look, I'm not exactly sure what that has to do with anything, but somehow both of these drashas will coexist according to Rav Sheshes. Now, the first stage to understand this Gemara is that according to Rav Sheshes, Mesaita do not operate if there are Eidim in Medina Sayyam. Meaning anyone who knows about the situation, if there are Eidim that know, the waters don't work. Says the Gemara like this. And Rav Sheshes additionally opened our eyes in the Mishnah for another point. The Mishnah tells us that if Eidim come along and say that she's Tameh, when did these Eidim come along and tell us that she's Tameh? If we're saying the Eidim came along before she drank, so then she's a Zaina. In other words, the Mishnah already said, if the woman says she's Tameh, we don't make her drink, right? If one aid came along and said, we don't make her drink. So if two aidim are coming along, of course, what's the chiddush here? There's no chiddush. Bechlal. What does the Mishnah mean when it says that aidim come along and say that she's a tamei? When did they come? Before she drank? So even if she herself said that she was tamei, she would not be allowed to drink. She would be asked to eat shum. I don't need two aidim come along to tell me before she drank that she was tamei, therefore she has to eat shum. Of course, pashat. Even if she herself says that she's tamei, she's asked to eat shum. I don't need to wait and tell me this at all. Says the Gemara, it must be after she already drank. After she already drank, which you would assume that if she survived, right, which we're talking about, obviously in a situation where she survived the drinking ordeal, and now she wants to eat truma. The question is, can she eat the truma? So you normally thought that when you finish the drinking, you're done. You're done. The process is over. You're survived. Now to end up coming along and saying, actually, she's tamei. What's going on in this situation? What would we do? If you say, like if Sheshes does, that if there are Eidim that knew about her being tamei, so the water doesn't work. So in that situation, it makes sense, according to Rav Sheshes' understanding. If you have two Eidim, Sayyam, that are available to come, and they hadn't made it. But eventually they'll get there. The water will not work. Period. Full stop. And that's why, even if you thought she was over the ordeal, if two Adam come along now, they are able to answer up and eat the truma. So just point out here, what happens if one aid comes along? Before we go any further, just to mention a side note, Taisus, in the Taisus of Shabbat Eidim, Taisus ends up saying, Stavra duhadin leidecha. Taisus, even if one aid comes along, it's very interesting, right? Because we have one aid that is trusted before the drinking ordeal, and do we still trust the one aid after the drinking ordeal? Taisus says, Mustafa, we do trust the aid. Even after the drinking ordeal is passed, even after she survived, we still trust the one aid. The Rambam is very clear. That no, if one aid came along after the drinking ordeal, we do not trust him whatsoever. She could be tachas bad, no problem whatsoever. Remember what we discussed before already a couple of times, the machlokes between the Rambam and Rashi. Rashi says it has to be the aid echad in the Isis stira. According to Rambam, no. According to Rambam, aid echad could be any time. Once it was kinyan stira, it could be a year later. Aid echad is no problem. But the fundamental understanding, according to the Rambam, was that once there was a kinyan stira, she's now in that kind of position where aid echad could tip it over. Doesn't make a difference if the Eid Echad is there at the time of the Isis Tira or some other time in the future. And Eid Echad is believed. But once she drinks, it's over. If she drank and survived, an Eid Echad can't do anything to her. The only way that something can be done is if there were two Eidim. But as Tais disagrees, Tais says even one Eid would be sufficient. Okay, so we're finishing in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, so if you want to say that, so the Gemara is saying now, according to the way Rav Sheshes is learning, if you have Edom Dina Sayam, that water is not going to work whatsoever. So then if you have two Edom who came along and said that she was Nidmes, that must have taken place after she has drank, because before she drank, there's no Chiddush whatsoever. After she drank, why the water didn't work? The water didn't work because of the fact that there were Edom. So that's why it didn't work, and that's why we could accept the testimony. Says the Gemara, and if you would say that the water does in fact work, then these Edom are clearly Eidah Sheker, right? Because if the water still had the possibility of working, then how didn't it work? If the water works, I mean, if the Xeris HaKasav that he learned out of Eidah Bah, to teach you that if there are Eidim, the water doesn't work. So then, if you disagree with that Xeris HaKasav, then why didn't the water work? Elamai, if the water could work and you don't accept this Xeris HaKasav, then it must be these Eidim or Eidah Sheker, because the water didn't work. She's alive. So this, the way the Gemara wants to say, is a proof that Rav Sheshes is really eye-opening us for our Mishnah. That we talk about two Eidim testify that she was Matana. When did that happen? After she drank. After she drank, what do you mean? After she drank? After she drank, what do I need Eidim for? By definition, if she drank, doesn't mean that she wasn't guilty? No. If there were Eidim, this is a custom, it won't work the drinking. And we didn't know because they didn't come yet. But now we know Mafreya that it didn't work out because of the fact that there were Eidim. So therefore, since there were Eidim, by definition, it means that the water that she drank wouldn't work. So now the Eidim come along and they could answer up and eat Truma. That's how Rav Sheshes understands the Gemara. Rabbi Yosef is not going to disagree. Rabbi Yosef is going to introduce a new idea that says, what do you mean? It could be very well that the Eidim are believed, not because of the fact that the water didn't work. The water worked. The water did work. It was possible for the water to work. One second. If the water works, then how come she's alive? Says Rabbi Yosef, it's possible to have a situation where the schus is toilet in the woman. Meaning, a woman drank, and she will get punished, but not today. There's a schus that the woman has that will push off her punishment to the future. And so therefore, when I see the woman is alive today, it doesn't mean that she was innocent. It could be she's guilty. but we don't know yet. And also doesn't mean, therefore, that the Eidim who are Medina Sayyam are going to mean that the water doesn't work. We don't have to accept the Xeris Akasim. The fact that the Eidim Medina Sayyam who haven't shown up yet doesn't mean anything on the water. The water can still work. Elamai, how if the water works, how come she'd be alive? Because she has a chus that's that's going to push her out into the future. So Biesa disagrees fundamentally on this idea of Rav Sheshes, that if they're Edom, Yasiyam, then therefore that means the water won't work. The water could work. Says the Gemara, I say, no, the water does work. The water is able to check around. And nevertheless, the reason that she didn't die is because she has a chus that pushes her out into the future. And that's the reason why she's alive. And that's what they didn't come along and say, that could ask her up in eating truma. So in other words, Rabbi Yosef, it could also be the Edom are coming along, not Mekameh that she drank, but after that she drank. And the reason they're able to ask her up is because of the fact that she was guilty. Doesn't that mean that the water by definition didn't work? No, the water works. Why didn't she die? Good. This closest to her live for some time in the future. We might come with said thing more, but not the Rebbe. Yosef and Rav Sheshes in relation to the deterioration of Rebbe. What does that mean? The time we learn in the Mishnah later on. Rabbi Yom is close to the Maimon. Person is close, it's going to be pushing off the Maimon for some point in the future. Then he let us in a Shabbat, but she won't be able to give birth. She won't be able to have sort of a better. She won't get better physically over the time. Rather, she's going to be deteriorating as time goes on. So if she makes the way and then she'll die in the way that we learned about Sotah, how the Sotah dies with self-forbidden, right? Etc. Her body's going to fall apart. That is the position of Rebbe. Rav Sheshes, Sava Ben Rabbein Rabbanan have misnavno. According to Rav Sheshes, both according to Rebbe and the Rabbanan, there's going to be a situation of deterioration. Rav Yosef Saval Rabbi having misnavno, Rabbanan having misnavno. Rav Yosef disagrees, but says no, there's no deterioration according to the Rabbanan. Now, in other words, what does that mean? If the woman drank today, I would say this chus is going to tell her to push her that she won't die for another year. So according to the way Rabbi Yosef is learning, the Rabbanan say that there's no misnavno, there's no deterioration. So today, I have absolutely no idea that this woman is deteriorating. I can't tell. I can't tell at all. So according to Rabbi Yosef, the woman drank. She's not deteriorating in any noticeable way. One day she's going to kill over and die in the way Sotah dies. But until that point, zero indication. So now it makes sense why I have Adam come along and they're going to testify that she's Mekama, and we're going to say those Adam work. Why? Because there's no indication whatsoever, b'chalal, that there was any deterioration. And therefore, no indication at all that she was, in fact, guilty. But it could very well be the water's working. Could very well be that the Adam are coming along and showing us something that we would have otherwise not known until the day she killed off. And that's why the Adam post drinking are still accepted to answer up in Truma. As according to Rav Sheshes, the fundamental principle is that before the water could work, there has to be, in essence, there has to be fundamentally no Adam anywhere that knew about Ma'aser Tumah. Because if there are, the water doesn't work at all. So when this woman drank, it's not the water worked. The water did not work b'chlal. And then these Adam came along and asked her up in Truma because otherwise she would never be asked. Why should never be asked? Because there would be no killing over, there would be nothing, there would be zero, there would be no indication, no evidence of changing her whatsoever, because by definition the water did not work here at all. So according to the way Rav Sheshes is learning, this woman, we needed the Adam to come along because the water b'chlal didn't work for her. More than that, says Rav Sheshes, if it will be a situation where the water was working, but the schluss was told her that she wouldn't be dying right away, then there'll be an indication of deterioration. Meaning, right away, there will be something that changed in her body, both according to Rebbe and according to Rabbanan, there'll be some big change. The fact that there was no change b'chlal means that it wasn't working. Why wasn't it working? Because the Adam didn't say out. That's why these Adam come along now, Aser and Truma. So you have two ways to get to how why the Adam are Aser and Truma, both of which are saying that the woman today was not indication whatsoever that she is having any problems after she drank. According to Rav Sheshes, because there were Edom Medina Sayam, which means that the water doesn't work. According to Rabbi Yosef, no. There was Edom Medina Sayam, the water works no problem. Why is the water not having any indication today? Because she has a chus. And the chus will be tell until the day she kills over. And therefore, the Edom can come along now and master up in Truma. Says the more now question. Rav Shimon Rashi asked the following question. Rav Shimon disagrees. He says there's no schus that gets pushed, that the woman's able to be, sort of survive for some time. Why not? If you want to say that there was a schus that would be able to push her off and exist, well, much longer than she deserved because of the fact that she has some schus, as we'll see later on what the schusim are, then effectively you're going to be pushing off the fear of any woman to have for drinking. Right? The whole reason that we try to coerce them into saying that they were Masana by saying, look, you don't want to be Mecha Shem Hashem and all these terrible things that's going to happen to you, blah, blah, blah. But if the woman knows she has a lot of good chusim, she won't be so scared to drink. It's going to defeat the whole purpose of trying to avoid the erasure of the Shem Hashem. More than that, all the women who drank and survived the ordeal, they're never going to be considered to be tar because one day it might kill over in the future. They never you say, oh no, they have really good schus, and that's why they didn't die. One day they're going to die. So, according to Shimon, you're defeating the whole purpose, right? If you allow the schus to be Torah. So now the more adds in what Rav Shimon Rashi is saying based upon this. This is the member from Rav Shimon there. But now we're adding on Rav Shimon Rashi's question. So according to Rav Shimon Rashi, if you're going to say that Edom Siyam means now that you're not going to work, the water is not going to work. So then you're going to also be Mercy Shemer al Tyrus. By contrast, if the water is going to work, no problem. It's just maybe she has a chusas, so he doesn't. He doesn't agree with Rav Shimon, but according to Rav Sheshes, who holds that the water doesn't work bechlal, so then anytime you have a situation where you have a woman who's drinking, so you also, and it didn't work, you also have a shame on the tyrus. You can always say that this woman who drank and nothing happened, that they'll probably ate him this so that's why the water doesn't work at all. So she's really guilty. So you'll never know that she's not guilty. Right? And the way Rav Sheshes is learning, I was asking, Rav Shimon's question or Rav Shimon's challenge should apply to Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes is saying, well, water doesn't drink, we have exercikas for Edom, but the water doesn't work if the Edom didn't say Well, says the Gemara, if that's true, it's exercikas, the water doesn't work because the Edom didn't say then that practically would mean that you never would know that any woman is tar after she drank. Because you can always say, well, no, they're probably Edom didn't say So you might say shame on all the women. Says the Rav Shimon comes, you're asking me a question of Sheshes based upon the Shita of Shimon. Rav Shimon chus le'Italia, Edom navi le'Tal. According to Rav Shimon, he holds that there's no way to delay the punishment of a Sotah based upon her schusim. So he holds there's no way to delay the punishment of a Sotah either. What if there were Edom either? Well, no difference for Rav Shimon. It's the same. For Rav Shimon, it's no different. But obviously, Rav Sheshes is not going to Rav Shimon because Rav Sheshes is holding that if the Edom didn't say in fact, it would be totally right. The water would not work until the Edom come. The water does not work because you need the Edom to actually come. All right, so we have to stop over here for Vav and Aleph, and we'll do the next share on Vav and Beis.